I'm Marilyn Hemingway, and welcome to A Gathering Place. I said, I'm stepping back because we have young voices who want to be heard and they're moving on something.
Branding is really important to you and your business.
Even the basic type of technology, you learn it all.
And people are
Good question. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Gathering Place hosted by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce and me, Marilyn Hemingway. It is good to have everyone join us today, and I'm excited about this topic because, quite frankly, it's a homeboy who's joining us, who's gone off and really done some great things. He's got his PhD, and he's just really smart. But I love the fact that he has concentrated on the Gullah history and our impact on African American history, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And he is in the midst of revising a book, and I'm going to get the title correct. The 1526 Project, Africana Studies and the Gullah Geechee Origins of African American History and Culture. Y'all, this is something that I talk about all the time, and he's the one who's done the research. He's got the knowledge, and I'm just excited that he is here to share that knowledge with us. So we welcome Dr. Samuel T. Livingston. He is an associate professor of Africana Studies at Morehouse College, and he's a researcher of Black culture, leadership, and resistant movements, and I'm excited to have him here, so let's bring him on. And I don't call him Dr. Livingston, I call him Sam. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate this. And I was saying earlier, I just salute the work that the Gullah Chamber is doing, just advocating for the culture and keeping that voice of Black politics and Gullah politics alive. So thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, we talk, and I have a really good friend of mine who's a professor at the University of Virginia, and he calls me an organic intellect. Yeah. And I love it. I will claim that because I love it. But I also appreciate those who've done the research, who've done the study to put that PhD behind their names, because I think it informs me. And has an organic intellect. I'm always learning. And my late mother always said, even after college, continue learning, Marilyn, whether it's community classes or webinars. Now they call them webinars now, workshops, whatever, keep learning. And that also includes having these type of conversations, bringing in folks with knowledge and just sharing it, because it helps us. It helps us on so many levels. It helps us understand the context of the present, to understand the history. And that's why I was so excited to bring you on, because this is going to be really informative, if just in the context of what's going on right now in the present. So tell us, Sam, I read the title, the 1526 Project, Africana Studies and the Gullah Geechee Origins of African American History and Culture. First of all, first question for me. Why 1526?
Great question. And I have to say, in a way, I didn't plan on this being my research focus. When I was in graduate school, I focused more on hip hop culture. I did this piece on the Nation of Islam and hip hop. And then I started looking at Black leadership traditions and resistance movements. But there was always a draw. And I think that really comes from my mother. And her side of the family is really, I say really my whole upbringing in North Santee. But 1526 is important because, in all honesty, as a scholar, if you're going to talk about the beginning of something, you can't begin with a grandchild or a great grandchild. You can't begin with the latter descendants. You have to begin with the beginning. And as far as I know, 1526 comes before 1619, and it's earlier. But, there are several other reasons now. There's, I think that it impacts how we look at the world and how we understand our history and our sojourn in this country and in the world. But 1526 is important because it just comes first. So, so there are several other reasons. I don't know if you want me to dive in.
I do want to be a little specific for 1526 to give kind of some foundation here. And tell me if I'm wrong. I do want you to give me a couple examples. And I think one example is the arrival of the Spanish in the Carolinas,
yes,
which I think to this day, we still really don't know where they landed. But I remember growing up in Georgetown, being a military brat, obviously back and forth, but being here in Georgetown to finish high school, that the belief was the Spaniards came with enslaved persons, and they were right up the street from where you and I grew up from in Georgetown, Hobcob Barony. And in recent years, they're saying that they're not sure. They have not found evidence.
That's true.
So to me, 1526, that's the immediate image I get, is that's where it started for Georgetown, the Low Country, when the Spaniards came to this area. So tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm in the right direction. And gave some examples. Mm-hmm.
There's a few more details that I think that are really that are really important. Just like you said, to be clear, no scholar knows exactly where. There's no one building. But what we have are a body of records, and we found more and more records, especially coming from the Spanish, the farther we've gone along in the study of history. So we found these things that they call rudders, and basically these are like records of ship's captains, and they talk about how far was this place from one place where they journeyed to, and based on that, the records suggest that they actually landed at Winyah Bay in Georgetown. Could be Hobcob Barony, but it looks like Winyah Bay, which is very close to that. And then for some reason, they journeyed further south, and it looks like it's almost about 150 miles south, and it matches up to around the Savannah or the Sapelo Sound region. And there's some archaeological artifacts and digs that they're doing to actually verify that. But more than likely, the best historical records suggest that around August, they landed at Winyah Bay and then moved further south to down to Georgia. So this guy, the Spaniard, his name was Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. And I think it's interesting why he actually decided to explore this area. I try to share some of the Spanish records. My Spanish is very rusty, but using Google Translate and just going over my high school Spanish, I can make out some of these records. But so he actually was, I say, enticed. Some people say tricked by a Native American man who was from South Carolina, from the Georgetown area. His English name was Francisco Chicora. And Chicora weaved this tale because they had taken him, and like they had enslaved thousands of Native Americans and taken them to the Caribbean, some of them even taken to Spain. But Chicora was on the island of Hispaniola, and he desired strongly to get back. And we know this because he started weaving these tales, talking about, oh man, if you go to my land of Chicora or the Chacori region, it's like a land of milk and honey. The people there are Christians. Our king is a Christian. Oh,
really playing it up.
Building it up. It's a gold. You just, you can just scratch the soil and you'll find gold. So he's just weaving this tale. And so Vasquez decides, okay, yeah, we're going to actually explore this. We have some confirmation from earlier explorations that began around 1520. So in 1526, that's when they took these 5 ships led by the Capitana, and they took 500 Spaniards, including 100 African people. But as the story goes, the historical record suggests, as soon as they landed and they actually shipwrecked off of Winyah Bay, Chicora split. He is gone. And it's like, you're never going to hear from me again. But that left those 100 Africans to, of course, to toil with the Spaniards. And they went through I say it was like hell. It's like hell on earth. They had this cold snap in October or so that literally killed several scores of the Spaniards. And then, they had yellow fever. So this cold snap, the yellow fever, and then of course they started making the Native Americans do all this work, and the Africans, because once they moved down to Sapelo Sound, they started building a settlement. They built a church, the houses and everything. But the Africans did not like how they were treating the Native Americans. So apparently they rose up and destroyed the settlement and attacked the particular guy. Oh yeah, Lucas Vasquez died of the yellow fever or the cold, either one of those. We really don't know. But so they attacked and they destroyed the settlement, and basically in liberating themselves, they basically freed up the Native Americans from the way that they were being treated as well.
So this is interesting because you're giving me even more details, but let's start making connections because we have a short time today. We can talk about this alone for an hour or more, but what I've read about them landing in Winyah Bay, this possible landing, is that they were here for some time and that some enslaved Africans melted into the woods. And there were Native American tribes here, obviously Winyah Native American tribe, other Native American tribes. And so often we hear about that these tribes just disappeared. I wonder what DNA would really show us if folks in this area, and when I say folks, Gullah, Black folks, really had DNA and really, we hear about our Cherokee origins. We don't talk about Edisto. I don't think these people just died and disappeared. No. Yes, they did, but we need to seriously look at the blending of these Native American tribes with enslaved Africans. You just don't disappear in the woods. You met somebody, and then from there, human nature is you're going to start connecting and blending together, intermingling. And that's human nature. So that's one thing. Two, for them to revolt and take out that settlement, was that the beginnings of the Seminole Nation? I don't know if you've dug into that. And I've been at the African and Gullah Geechee Diaspora Conference at Coastal Carolina University, and they had researchers there who researched the beginning of the Seminole Indian tribe, Native American tribe, that people hear Seminole now, they think casinos and, Florida, which is true, but they don't understand the origins of the Seminoles. And the Seminoles is because enslaved Africans escaped to Florida, and Native American tribes went into Florida, and they started 12 towns that eventually became the Seminole tribe, Indian Native American tribe, because they were actually, the Spanish made the call because we were fighting against they were fighting against the English. So that's the second point I wanted to make. Okay. Some of that roots in there.
Is that connected?
The blending of Native American, African. And then the third point, I totally forgot what the third point was. If you remember in history, the Spanish-American Wars, you just think the Spanish were fighting the English, but why were the English fighting the Spanish? It's because the English wanted their enslaved Africans back, and the Native Americans said no. And that's why they went to war twice, with the Spanish Americans. So that kind of like lays that foundation. Correct me, give me more information if I'm wrong, but it's fascinating why you need to understand history, because it informs what happens to this day, that led to the increased enslavement of Africans. It led to eventually the Civil War. It led to Reconstruction. It led to Jim Crow, lynching, Civil Rights Movement today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And because that revolt part of it, people were revolting from the beginning, and you don't hear these stories about the revolt.
That's true. But I want to walk us back just slightly on the first.
Sure, please do.
We talked about the connections, and I think 1526 is really important because it focuses us on the relationship between Native Americans, but also Africans and the other Caribbean islands. So
Mm-hmm.
those were enslaved Africans, but they came from Hispaniola, what would today be Dominican Republic and Haiti. So there's those connections too that we really need to explore, and those would really play themselves out when it came to Denmark Vesey's rebellion. But going back a little bit further, I would say those early 100 Africans, plus you have to remember now, so before 1619, you got the 1526 100 Africans. With Francisco de Chicora, we don't know how many Africans left with him. There's no record that any of them left because they don't say it. So, and if they did leave with him, they would have said it because, you know, I know that he was their guide. So what they do though is that when they rebel, and we think that the rebellion actually took place at Sapelo down in Georgia. So the rebellion takes place there. They destroyed that settlement, and from there, it is apparent that, you know, that they would have actually melted into the population, integrated into the Native American population. But the Spanish don't stop coming. So in 1565, they set up St. Augustine, and there are scores, if not hundreds, of Africans at St. Augustine, which was the first European town in North America. So that's before 1619. You got to look at that whole history. Then in 1566, the next year, the Spanish come back to South Carolina at St. Helena. And again, the Native Americans attack, but we know that the Spanish did not try to colonize any place without taking their labor force. And Africans were increasingly a part of this labor force. So before we get to the Seminoles, there's this history of Africans living in South Carolina and Georgia and in Florida and interacting with the Native Americans. What we do know is that some of the Africans who do participate in the Seminole Wars, what Yusuf Clyde calls the Gullah Wars, and I would definitely recommend this book, very, very good, The Legacy of Igbo Land. Sister Marquetta Goodwine, her edited text, if you're interested in that. But there's a really good chapter by Yusuf Clyde called the Gullah Wars, and that's his name for the Seminole Wars. But what we know about those Africans is that they were already versed in the languages of the Muskogee, which are basically what we would call the Creeks, who would become the Seminoles. So how were there these Africans who already had this language facility in Native American languages? Well, it makes sense if we put the context of 1526, 1565, and 1566 at St. Helena in play. Basically, Africans were already interacting and learning the languages of the Native American nations who were in that area. So that explains somebody like a John Abraham and all these other figures who were leaders, because they could actually command troops, African troops. And again, too, just like you said, hundreds, thousands of Africans were escaping from South Carolina down to Florida. We know the Stoner Rebellion was largely because of, in response to this attempt to get down to Fort Mose, or some people say Fort Mose, just outside of St. Augustine, Florida in 1738. So they established that fort. The Spanish basically make a call. You make it down here, you have your freedom. And of course, the trade-off is that you basically have to serve in our military. But you know, that's a benefit too, in a way, because they're getting military training. And so I think Clyde is onto something. We need a reinterpretation of this history, and I definitely appreciate, I think we just need more and more. So I got to give props to the people who are actually doing the research, people like Daniel C. Littlefield, Daniel F. Littlefield too. Those scholars are doing great research, and a number of others. But I just think we can't afford to continue this rhetoric of saying 1619 is the beginning when it's actually not, because there are real lives that we're ignoring. We say Black Lives Matter, but if all Black Lives Matter, then we have to pay attention to the full history and not just the history of people who spoke English. And that's another thing in terms of that bias piece there. So connections are critical. I forgot to say.
I think that speaks to, I hear a little bit when people say, our history does not begin with enslavement.
True.
It's prior to that. So that takes that next step backwards
But
for us to understand. And you also hear how folks are saying, well, we never rebelled, there wasn't revolt. And I'm not saying this to promote violence, but I understand the context of it.
It's true. And it's definitely not true. And I take that very seriously. I'm an African-centered scholar. I'm an Afrocentric scholar. So I'm talking about our history goes back to pre-Kemetic, pre-Nile Valley, those types of civilizations, absolutely. But 1526 is actually a helpful date, because if we look at what is happening on the African continent in 1526, you still have the kingdom of Songhai in place. Their greatest emperor, Askia Muhammad Touré, is going to live until 1528. So that empire is there, and it forces us to begin to actually begin thinking about our history relative to the African continent, and not just in the diaspora. The diaspora that's our home. It's beautiful. We need to make those connections, but the African continent is where the crisis actually begins, especially as we try to wrestle with slavery and to resist slavery earlier than people actually want to give credit. So I always say 1526 forces us to talk about Songhai, and then Songhai lasts until 1591, the Battle of Tondibi, when the Moroccans invade and they destroy the kingdom of Songhai. Then that breaks up that West African empire, and then you begin to see lots of slave trading based on that.
Then the slave trading increases.
The slave trading increases because you have not just one empire, but you have several states: the Susu state, Mali, Wolof, Kayor, all these other states. They're beginning to compete with each other. They go to war, and our European neighbors, they take advantage of those conflicts and participate in it too. Because when we say Morocco invaded the Songhai, the Spanish came along with them. The Spanish supplied most of the arms for that Moroccan invasion. And that's very clear. The history is very clear. But that also, it kind of raises a question about our relationship with the Moors. Who are the Moors, and what role do they really play in Africa, in African history? So 1526 is a helpful date. I just think, it's kind of a shame what we even do with 1619, because we say, well, we know those are 20 Angolans, but what's the full story? The story about the Portuguese attacking the town of Loango and basically trying to destroy that town and then depopulate it. And so I would say 1619 is very important, but it's important because not just because it begins American history or even African American history, but it's a point where we can actually look at how and compare what's going on in other African locations as well. And I think that's critical for us to really become mature and see ourselves as a global people, not just as American citizens.
When I started the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce in 2018, and you're taking this even further back, so this is even strengthening my thoughts, is I started it knowing we were a global community. And I based it on the transatlantic slave route because, and I don't think people really think about that, because enslaved Africans were taken from West Africa. They were taken to South America. They were taken to the islands. They were taken to North America. They were taken to England, the transatlantic slave route. That in and of itself makes us a global people.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we're a global community. And I'm careful in explaining to people when I have the time. I say the Gullah Geechee Chamber, my intention, I started it here in Georgetown, South Carolina, because that's my home and it's the epicenter of the rice culture. But the federal designation, and the federal designation, folks, is North Carolina to Wilmington, all of the South Carolina coast, all of the Georgia coast to Florida, Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But we are a global community.
That's right.
And once we understand that, then you start making these connections to the empires, what you just said about the empires. And once you understand an empire and how an empire ends, it falls apart and it ends. And you also understand the fact that in history, and I'm generalizing with this one, is empires come and go about every 400 to 500 years. Mm-hmm. So let's take this to more global perspective and include the European and American history. American, as we know it in one form or another with this European influence, if you're talking 1526, now you're talking more than 400 years.
Yes.
And if empires on roughly go through a cycle of 400 to 500 years, look at our government and what's happening with our government now.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And this government was already founded on a serious human crack in humanity, the enslavement of a people. So you already on shaky ground.
On 2 feet, on Native American, stealing Native American land, the genocide of Native Americans.
The genocide of Native Americans, stealing their land and stealing people from their land.
Absolutely.
Forced labor. So you already have a shaky foundation that has simply been held together through white supremacy by convincing people that your value is your whiteness. So imagine now you can only keep that what's been bubbling beneath the surface, eventually it's going to start coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that because the population is becoming more black and brown. Well, if you look at that from an American-centric version, that can be very frightening. But if you look at it from a global perspective, that's nothing new because the majority of the world is black and brown.
Yep. I have to give credit to the father of Gullah studies, Lorenzo Dow Turner, and I'm sorry, I got to learn to.
You got it.
There we go. Lorenzo Dow Turner, the father of Gullah studies, because of his research, what you're saying is not just politics, and politics are very important. There's a chapter in the book that I'm working on actually that compares the social contracts of the Gullah in Georgia, South Carolina, especially in South Carolina and Georgia, compares it to the Haitian social contract and the whole revolutionary thought process that took place connecting the Gullah to actually what happened in Haiti. Mm-hmm. And I think we really need to pay attention to that. But the reason why I mentioned Turner is because his perspective was global. He saw connections between the language, the Afro-Portuguese language that's spoken down in Brazil, where most of the enslaved Africans, the single largest plurality of Africans were taken, it's almost like 5 million, something like 4.7 million people were taken down to Brazil. So he's comparing, and he's making connections to Brazil. He's connecting the Gullah to Liberia, to Sierra Leone. He's providing us an intellectual context and foundation where we can actually see, not just see ourselves as global citizens, but to actually communicate with other people. And I think that is critical. So that Gullah is not just a Creole that's local. And I don't even use the word Creole, to tell you the truth. But I use the word that some of the linguists use. They say there's Afrolex, high languages, Basalex, low languages, and Mesolex, right? The language that the average everyday speak. Well, I say, let's come up with an Afrolec. Let's come up with an Afrolec that connects African people in South America, the Caribbean, in Europe, and Africa as well. And I think those are critical. Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. I see Rob, my boy, Rob, reminding us absolutely that is Lorenzo Dow Turner's opus, his masterpiece. But he wrote several other books that actually connect and look and compare Gullah language too with the language of people in Brazil and all these other areas as well. So scholarship is a lot. It's complicated, but it's trying to break down issues and to show connections. If you have scholars who are not trying to connect people, then to me, you are not serving a real just purpose. If you're just trying to hear yourself speak and talk, try to make things complex unnecessarily so, then I think that is critical. But the piece that you mentioned also in terms of what America has done in sacrificing the perspective of enslaved African people and Native American people is critical, because in all honesty, I don't have confidence that Euro-America has the cultural and social capital to heal itself and to make itself a nation that's based on justice. If they had the capital, they would have already done it. But so now African people, African Americans have to actually step up, and we have to look at our full version of our history. And again, 1619 is a part of it, but it's not the only part. It's not the only.
The full picture. Yeah. And so I'm going to talk a little bit of what you said, that I actually agree with you that the European, they will not be able to heal itself, because it goes back to that foundation of how they created this country. And you cannot solve the problem with the same mindset. And too many of them, they have no clue whatsoever. And too many of us, Gullah Geechee, African American, Black, we don't know either, because we've been miseducated. And we've lost contact with our roots of who we are in general. Now, there's some of us who are researching, who study it, who get it. But even me, I've never been to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's not going to get to Africa.
But you know what, though, Marilyn?
Go ahead.
We should go back to our grandmothers, go back to our aunts, our uncles, go back and interview them. You want to get close to Africa, you go back and interview the elders in your community and look at the stories that they will tell. And, so this is really helpful if our students who are in school, if they're doing projects, to go back and ask that question. I have to give credit to my fourth grade teacher, Ms. Williams, for making me interview my grandfather, Reverend Sam Barr. And, I learned a lot just about the Black perspective, because, I was supposed to ask about the Great Depression. And I went home and I had my little questions, and I asked my grandfather, Daddy, what we call our grandfather Daddy, what was the Great Depression like? And he was like, what Great Depression? He was like, that period when everybody was poor, did anybody have a job? He was like, oh, you mean life? You mean just like, I'll never forget that. But I say that seriously because in all honesty, if we go back to Africa and we haven't done the work of actually interviewing and taking stock of the values that our ancestors taught us here, I do agree with Carter G. Woodson on one hand. There is miseducation in terms of what we know about the exact dates and everything. But we received, I think, in all honesty, all the values that are needed to create a just society from our grandparents, from our parents, from our elders. And to me, we have to go back and take that. That's gold right there. That's what has kept us alive. And so I agree with you in a way, but I just think we shouldn't sleep on the value of what our elders and what they gave us, because again, what Lorenzo Dow Turner is talking about with language also holds with the culture. And language is the fountain piece. It's the method we're going to deliver this culture, right? So those cultural values are there, and that's really what I'm actually trying to get at. And with the book, the 1526 Project, to look at how those communities that were founded either in the woods with the Maroon communities, or like our home community of North Santee, that they started that before slavery's over. So someone had the forethought to say, I'm going to go and establish this little triangular tract of land, this community. And we did this all over the place: North Santee, Sanpit, Allendale, all over the place, South Island, and so I think it's important for us to actually look at those communities and to say, well, what was going on? What was their thinking? How did they plan on surviving? And because someone had the forethought to say slavery is not going to last forever. And this thing is going to fall. And when it does, we're not going to be able to live, or we don't even want to live on these damn plantations. So let's actually have a place that we can call our own too.
And I agree with you. And this is why we need to have these conversations to flesh out this in a short period of time. I wish we could talk, for the next 365 days. But but before we do, I want to remind everyone that you are watching a gathering place hosted by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, and we're excited to have you with us today. And we're also excited to have Samuel Livingston, Sam, with us to talk about the Gullah Geechee origins of African American history. You are so true. You are so correct about the grandparents, because I even think about in 2020 how we went to vote. We did not the resilience and the strength it took to go in the middle of a pandemic, in cold and hot, all kind of weather, and stand in line and to vote.
Yeah.
And you can see that. I think it was definitely after Nelson Mandela was released and he ran for president of South Africa the first time, and you saw hundreds of South Africans, Black South Africans, standing in line to vote for days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's connection, folks. There's an African connection that we don't even think about. It's just in our blood. It's in our DNA to do that. And I think what we have these conversations not to be woke, but to have an awakening to the connections through our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. So if you do have those elders in your community, if you still have your grandparents around, I agree with you. Sit down and talk to them. For me, the moment that helped me is when the first original airing of Roots, because it became big then to do your family history. Yeah. And I have evolved into being the family historian. I keep up with that. But that's when I went to my grandparents, my grandmother, who's the only one living at the time, my parents, and I start talking to them and writing stuff down. And to this day, I have notes of, family history. I have in storage. I have notes, and the family come to me, who's this, who's that, and I can make certain connections, who's related to who and all, but also the stories, the stories that have been shared, and they speak of resilience. They speak of the cultural connections. And what I like to say, those who are in South America, those who are in the islands, we are cousins. We are simply cousins. And once we get it in our head that we're family, then we become global. Yeah. We're cousins in Africa. These are family, y'all. So, and you hear it in the language with the African tribal dialects, but you also hear the resilience because we took English and Spanish to come together with the African dialects to create Gullah language. It's the way we eat. It's what we eat. It's the way we worship. You could go to Africa and see the same worship traditions. You could go to California and see the same worship traditions. You could go to New York, you could go to Detroit and all the little towns in between and see that African influence because they simply just migrated. They were brought as the enslaved to this area. But what you were saying, when they went to North Santee and started that community before even slavery ended, that was a migration from the plantation.
That's right.
Then you went into the Great Migration where you went further out. So that's just who we are. I like the word awakening because we need to awake to the connections, to the history and the context of that history.
I have to say, besides my mother and my grandmother and Reverend Sam Barr, Dr. John Henrik Clarke really played a huge role in shaping the way that I think about this. So those connections you're talking about, Pan-Africanism, that's the way Malcolm is talking about it. Malcolm X is talking about it. That's the way Dr. Clarke, Marcus Garvey, they're talking about establishing those connections and on all levels. So I was lucky enough to I've been to a couple of African countries, but the trip we made in 2014 to the Congo, to DRC, was really, really impactful. And we just started talking with folks about, what do y'all need to actually do to bring about change in your country? DRC is really important, and I got to shout out my friends of the Congo colleagues, Brother Kwame Wilberg, Maurice Carney, and all my friends of the Congo folks in Atlanta and Washington and worldwide, and especially my folks in the Congo who are doing the work in the Congo. So we have these conversations that we are planning to renew from what we did in 2014, what we did in 2016. But the question that they keep raising, and I was so blessed, in all honesty, my brother Kennedy Bindu, a professor over at in Goma, in the eastern part of the Congo, he was like, Sam, you started this thing with this, what we call the Ball C21 Symposium. So why did you can't just let it sit there. So based upon their feedback, we're going to renew these conversations and talk about how do we actually develop a different model of leadership, because this is the thing. I love the foodways, I love the clothes, the style, even the spirituality. All of that is critical and vital and important. But if we don't translate that into a political philosophy that can help to change this world, then to me, I think it's like we're wasting our time. We're wasting a grand opportunity. Because again, look at what happened after Reconstruction. Look at how Africans changed the way that governance took place in the South, helped to create a school system, helped to end debt peonage, to really brought the South into the modern world. Why? Or who was actually doing this? I think we have to begin to look at that Gullah culture as a valuable asset and a source of social change, ideas for social change. And I think it goes all around. And that's why I always say everybody has a part to play. The food ways people have a part to play. The clothing designers, people who are doing research on African spirituality and religion. There's no one who cannot play a role. Everybody has a place in the struggle. And I'm clear on that too. This is scholarship, but this is also a part of our struggle. In the same way that David Walker was from Wilmington, North Carolina, Gullah, as far as I know, moved up to Boston, but at the same time, in David Walker's appeal, he's clear. I'm doing this to help liberate people. So I think our mission has to be the same. And it's not just it's anti-racist work, but it's deeper than that, because it's more so Rob, man, Rob introduced me to just about everybody in terms of my music. So, bro, but in terms of the, I lost my train of thought. Rob, I'm blaming you on that, man. I lost my train of thought. So I'm gonna be quiet, Marilyn. You go ahead.
But actually, I agree with you. It's beyond anti-racism. It's beyond. This is what I say. Bottom line, the indigenous people will save us. And I connected to the environment. I connected to addressing climate change and even green renewable energy, because that's one of the things that the chamber, I knew from day one, our advocacy was going to be the environment because of our ties to the land and to the water. And when I say the ties, that they enslaved engineers because we knew how to control the flow of the water. That's engineers. All right. So we understand the land and the water. And with addressing climate change, you hear it. They talk about their Aboriginals and what happened in Australia last year. They actually had to quickly involve Aboriginal traditions to get those fires under control. They actually, the Europeans had the issues. The Aboriginals, through their traditional methods, controlled the fires. They were not as adversely impacted. Take what the Gullah know. And the control the flow of the water and the tides. That's what's going to, the indigenous people will save us when it comes to climate change. So that's bigger than black and white, because water knows no color. Water just knows, I'm going to get into every crevice, every crack, over every hill that you put in front of water. Water's going to move it. It knows no color. But the indigenous people know how to control that water. And if we don't listen to the indigenous people, Native Americans, Africans, African Americans, it's to our peril. And I say that, I think that's in the context of what you're saying. It's a political movement because water is political.
That's right.
Climate change is political. The environment is political. Economics is political. So if you don't include indigenous people at the table or create a new table with them, we're all going to perish. And this is real. This isn't, because we have not nurtured the earth that sustains us and provides us sustenance. So everybody, you might say, Marilyn's getting a little spiritual. That is true. But I'm actually being very practical. It is very practical that if we don't attain and retain some of these practices of our ancestors, we're going to perish. That's how nuanced and complex this is.
Right.
That's why it's important for us to have an awakening. And if we don't grab this political moment, we're all going to be in trouble. We're all going to be in trouble.
No, we absolutely agree. I don't know. Just real quick, but what you were saying about the spiritual piece is so important, though. I think one of the best gifts that Africa has given the world, and Africa has given the world just about everything, but it's this philosophy that this Kenya Rwandan scholar, Alexis Kagame, that he gave us this notion about what we call the Bantu worldview. And in South Africa, they turn that into the Ubuntu. They express it as the Ubuntu philosophy, that I am because you are, and because you are, I am, that we are interconnected, that your existence, my existence depends upon yours. But their philosophy, that extends out to the rest of the world, just like you're saying. Without clean water, clean air, clean land, without the animals and being able to live and survive and to thrive out here, then it's impossible for us to actually be healthy as well. So I think that's critical, in addition to creating the very first notion of a monotheistic God too. That's the one thing I want to say. When people, don't be afraid of getting into exploring African cultures and religions. To me, now that's one of the worst areas of miseducation that we received. And it was through religious indoctrination that we became afraid of the notion of African spirituality. But I'll say this, and this is not just me, this is based upon the research out here that's very clear. Africans create the first articulation of a notion of one God, of a monotheistic God. And that's through the word Nyambe. And the historical linguists, they are the ones who show us this. And this is going back to around 6,000 BC. So before anyone else is even talking about a notion of one God, Africans were already operating on that. And you can see it in that Bantu philosophy, in that Ubuntu philosophy as well. The notion of interconnectedness is through spirit, through Ntu, through spirit. So to me, Gullah, our ancestors were very good students. They held on to what they could. Some language, a lot of food, but a lot of spirituality that I think that actually has helped to transform the world. The drive to end slavery came from African people. We have to let's say that. Let's be very clear. The drive to create a just society during the civil rights movement came from Black churches where you still had that spirituality expressed. And that's not me, that's Dr. Alden Morris. I mean, he's very clear. And so many others who talk about the role of the church and everything. So let's not be afraid to actually get back and to connect what we're doing right now, what we have been doing for the last 500 years. I would say, 2026 will be the 500th anniversary of the birth of Black history. In the year 2026, we need to do something special. We need to create something. We need to start talking to each other across national boundaries. And I think the Gullah community is the perfect launch point for that. I know that's what's driving me.
Yeah, we have to be the leaders. We have to be the leaders, right? We have to be the
leaders, but I think we need to be at the heart of it. Let's put
I want us to be the leaders because our young people need to understand that. I think I keep hearing this refrain, in particular in politics, but this is in everything. Where are the leaders? Well, we are the leaders. You're the leader you've been looking for. And we need to own that. And I say this all the time too. And I was on a panel this past week and I said it. We need to own our story. We need to own who we are. We need to own our land. We need to own, once we own our story, then we're going to own our land. We're going to own our houses. We're going to own our businesses because you cannot disconnect that.
Yeah.
You cannot disconnect owning who you are. I've been on that journey on a personal level, and I hope that I'm part of being on that journey on a community level of who we are. And that's another reason I started the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, and I keep talking about ownership. But first, you have to own your story. that personal story.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to own your story in the sense of your community, your ancestry, your spirituality, who you are, where you come from. And once you own that, you determine its worth. So too many of us don't own it. We talk about being kings and queens, but we don't understand what that really means.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually tell people, I'm not a queen, I'm Marilyn Hemingway. That's bigger than being a queen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't need the title because I know who I am. I own who I am, and you will be amazed how much will fall away. And I cannot help but think about our ancestors, those who went to North Santee and owned their story and understood from there they had to own a piece of land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it's not about being an easy journey or a hard journey. It's about owning your story, and then you can deal with the barriers that are put in front of you. So that's what I mean, that we need to be leaders. We need to own that leadership.
Yeah.
That really literally is connected through generations. And that when you say my ancestors are speaking to me, you got to really understand you got to really understand that.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I share an image? And no, don't stop talking. I want to share an image. Let's see if I can do this.
Can you get it up? We've been talking about.
I got it. Let's see.
I hope this is the first time I've done it with my guest has done it. So
we'll stop that one. Let's do this. I think
okay.
I can do better. Here we go. So when you talk about the ancestors,
there we go.
Yeah. Then if I can, let's make it even a little bit larger.
Yeah, you control it. There you go.
Okay, there we go. These are my ancestors on my mother's mother's side, and at the center is our matriarch, this Harriet Edwards Witherspoon, and this picture was taken in 1908. Now, in 1908, we had a very racist governor here in South Carolina. Well, actually, he had retired, but he was like an elder statesman, Ben Pitchfork Tillman. And Ben Tillman gave this speech in the same year that this picture was taken. And that speech is called The Negro Problem in Immigration. I teach about this. We're going to write about it. It's going to be a part of the book. But that speech was about the fact that Black people in South Carolina were reproducing and growing in population. And he said that something had to come along and desolate these people, because they had survived slavery. They had survived the lynchings. They had survived Jim Crow. They survived everything that they could throw at our ancestors. And not just survive, but Miss Harriet Edwards, our great-great-grandmother, great-great-great-grandmother, she passed down the linkage of where our family came from. So in doing that, she said, look back to Timbuktu. And, you know, we've done 2 different DNA tests, African ancestry, 23andMe, and they both go back to that same connection, the Mandinka or Mende people, for both of those tests. But even more important than that is this idea of forming a community and as a notion of nation building. And when I think about who we need to really be studying, I can't agree with you more than to say that we go back and we actually own our story, know that story of where we came from, and to really claim that and connect that. And then, of course, I have to show this picture, because without these folks, the younger folks, my mother here, my grandfather, Reverend Sam Barr, Ms. Roosevelt Barr, my grandmother, and my Aunt Bobby, whose birthday was just yesterday. So I don't know, Chrissy is listening, my cousin, but you know, that's her daughter. But without them, we wouldn't know of the deeper story. And especially, I have to give credit to my mother, because she was that family historian. She was the Jaley or the griot in our family. And it's like me and Carrie and my cousins and everybody, we have to kind of carry that on. It's on all of us now. It's on all of us, but we can do it. I have confidence the same way they had confidence in us. I have full confidence in these young people that I see coming into our classrooms, and you know, I'm encouraged. I'm actually very, very encouraged. But it's encouragement that, in some ways, it's like, wow, okay, we got we got Sean over here, some students, we got Christian over here. We got a lot of different students doing activism, doing the scholarship. This is going to lead to a conflict, and we have to be ready for it. We have to be ready in every way possible.
Oh, yes. I was telling somebody that the other day, elected official, as a matter of fact, that, and this was more not conflict, but opportunity. But it's this, we do have to get prepared for conflict. And the opportunity, I told this elected official, it is up to you, the elected officials, and organizations such as the Gullah Geechee Chamber to get our community ready for the opportunities.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is also up to us, and through the NAACP involvement in, and we do spotlight and we educate folks, is we got to get people ready for the conflict.
Yeah.
Because power does not give up power willingly.
That's right.
Never has, never will. That's paraphrasing Frederick Douglass. But we have seen it in our community. We've seen it. There's always been backlash. If you understand your history in the context, and a friend of mine who's actually Gullah, he lives in Texas now, but he's from Guatemala Island. He and I, in politics, used to talk about this all the time. There's going to be a backlash to Barack Obama getting elected. And it would really kind of disturb us when people were saying we're in a post-racial world, because that was pulling blinders over people's eyes and not getting them prepared. Yeah. As Black people, as Gullah people, we cannot afford to not be prepared. Mm-hmm. We have to be prepared at all times. What happened yesterday with the vote in Congress to acquit the former president, there's going to be backlash. There's not backlash to that. There's going to be empowerment of those who do not wish us well.
That's right.
And there are too many guns out here, and we need to be, and I'm not saying this to scare people, I'm saying it to prepare people. And that's different, because when you're prepared, you are not afraid.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we need to talk about these things and make the connections, because every time we move forward, and we did move forward November 3rd, just the fact that who showed up to vote is a step forward in the bigger picture of moving forward. And there's backlash to that. That's why these people are up in arms. That's why they went to the Capitol, because they said, in spite of everything we've done, they still showed up on November 3rd. Yep. That is directly related to being Gullah, because in spite of enslavement, in spite of the lost promise of Reconstruction, in spite of lynching, in spite of Jim Crow, in spite of the backlash to the Civil Rights Movement, we're still here and we are still showing up. It's deeper than what they're saying Stacey Abrams did in Georgia. The foundation is Gullah.
That's right.
The root is Gullah. Because Gullah's in Georgia. Gullah's in South Carolina. We inform everything. That's why we have to have an awakening to take ownership of our resilience and strength. No one should be able to tell us what we cannot and cannot do. The only answer we need to have is, hold up, wait a minute, while I regroup and come at you from another direction. And if you hear what I just said, hold up, wait a minute, let us regroup. We say that in church all the time. We do it, and people don't even realize it. Because, I tell people, we do not recognize ourselves necessarily as Gullah. We just are. Just like your granddaddy told you.
Yeah.
What depression? That was just life. Yeah. It's the same with Gullah. We Gullah. We don't go around talking about, I'm Gullah. When I step out my house at 9 a.m., I don't put on the Gullah cloak. I'm Gullah. It's who I am. I live and breathe as Gullah. So there's no reason for me to walk into the space and announce it. It just is. It just is. Absolutely. We have to have the awakening to the resilience, to the context of Gullah. So when we walk into a room, everybody should pay attention. I don't need the title of queen or king. When we walk into the room, we just are. And that's very frightening to certain people because they don't have the capacity to understand. Europeans, those of European heritage, do not have the capacity to understand that, because you have to understand these are people who are willingly serving under queens and kings to this day. They do it willingly. They dress it up and say, oh, they attract tourism dollars and all that. But to this day, they willingly sacrifice self to serve under a constitutional monarchy.
It's true. It's true.
Go
ahead. We haven't explored not just our history enough and the culture, but our political traditions. And like I said, everything that drives you, that drives all of the people who are listening here. There's something that Africa has to say about each one of those areas. And to me, Gullah is the best, or a very good medium to rediscover that African identity and to tap into those African values and to really to live in this world as a person who insists on living by ma'at, living by truth, living by justice. So I think we're in a special place. We have a really great opportunity, but we got to live up to that opportunity. Do any of your audience members want to say anything, or no? No, we don't.
Well, I've been posting their comments the whole time, so they've been saying a lot. Okay. Do y'all have any questions, specific questions? Please post them in the comments and I will post them. They've been posting and sharing with a lot of folks out there. One thing I also want to say, two things about the Queen thing. And I'm not degrading that. I want people to understand that. But when Queen Elizabeth walks into a room, Queen Elizabeth never announces the Queen is here.
Right.
Other people announce the Queen is here. As Gullah, has people who are descended from enslaved Africans, people who are descended from Africans, you need to walk in the room and let other people announce the Queen is here and the King is here. And that takes some growth to understand it. So I'm putting that out there for folks. So y'all prove me wrong. Let me pull up my table. Y'all prove me wrong. Let other people announce who's here. And your presence will announce that, but you got to own your story. You got to own your story. So a question I have, Sam, is have you read the article, the op-ed piece, that Charles Blow wrote about the Great Migration, the return, the second migration? Are you aware of that?
Well, I know about the reverse migration you mean from the north to the south, or are you talking about?
From the north to the south, but he wrote an op-ed piece, I want to say it was right after the inauguration. It was published in the New York Times because if no one knows Charles Blow, he's a New York Times op-ed columnist. He wrote The Great Migration, the return migration, encouraging Black folks to return south. To create political power. And I wanted to know if you had heard that, because I think he speaks to what we're saying. Because I think once we own that story, we're going to try to get as close to our roots as possible. And in North America, the closest you can get to Africa without going to Africa is the Gullah community. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I didn't read that article. I didn't read that op-ed, but I know Charles Blow's work. I appreciate a lot of the work he does. But I agree, and I know the Republic of New Africa. That's their position. The Nation of Islam for a long time has said that. But I agree. We need to build foundations. I mean, and if we can do that in a particular community, then all of us can't be in one particular area, but there are opportunities in the Low Country that I think that, and I feel like this. I'm looking forward to retiring and moving back to the Low Country, because I'm tired of giving my money and paying this mortgage for a piece of land that at the end of the day you know, I have a little backyard. I can grow some of my you know, little whatever, tomatoes or whatever the heck I'm gonna grow. But at the end of the day, it's not really mine. But that area in North Santee, you know, that's much more connected to of course, my family, of that land being passed down. So there are opportunities for folks to live in an area where you have, I would say, much more of a peaceful culture, and a culture that's based on justice and real community values. And I got to say that.
I think you touched on something. I think with this migration that's happening, it is happening, and I don't think people are noticing it. Charles Blow's op-ed has brought more attention to it, and he's asking people to be more deliberate and intentional in doing it. That's his bottom line, his op-ed pieces. Be more deliberate and intentional. I think people are coming back because I'm retiring, I'm coming back. But what he's encouraging, even before you retire, come back. Okay, so there are two parts to that, though. You can come back, but the people who are here already, what are they doing to get ready for that influx of people that are starting to come back? So that lends itself, because Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce is an economic vehicle, so that's my lane. But I have to be informed of my culture and learn more, because I got to learn more, because it's all interconnected. One of the things we have to do is, this is why it's important that we need to start small local businesses. Ownership, back to ownership, because we've got to prepare not only for the people who are here right now, we got to prepare for the people coming back home, because they need jobs. They're not just going to come back and everybody got to grow a garden. Yeah, it's good. Now I encourage that. Grow your garden, because I do.
The whole year.
They coming back for professional jobs. Right. They're coming back to start businesses. They're starting to come back to do something with the land. If they don't already own it, they're going to want some land, etc. The people who are here, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, you've got to be prepared for that. Because everybody not going to Atlanta, they want to come to the rural areas, Columbia, Charleston, and which are already growing areas, because they're spreading out. So all these small towns need to be ready for this, so we can own the narrative, own the story, because the other folks, the white folks, are already coming, but they're coming to be retired. So that's a different type of economy. That's not a growth economy. That's a retired economy. But if we come back in a great migration, we're coming for growth. And if you want a piece of that pie, you better own something now. Yeah. That's why heirs property is a situation where families, y'all need to put your pride aside, get educated, and get your heirs property straight. Yeah, that's because right. If they aren't going to get, if they're not going to get it through development or taxes, what you going to do with that land? You don't want to lose it. It goes back to owning our story. Yeah. You know, and I think of the neighborhood that I grew up here in Georgetown. Talk about African connections that took me to my 50s to understand is this is a neighborhood that was deliberately developed, like North Santee, by Black folks, because somebody owned the land and got together with family and friends, my parents' generation, and said, we're going to develop this land. And you can actually see brothers and sisters who built a house next to each other. Yep. Over the time, families started marrying into each other. Or they were cousins. They were cousins who lived next to each other. That's deeply rooted in African tradition. I don't know if they thought about it like that at the time, but their roots informed them to move in that direction. Yeah. Yeah. We've got to have that awakening to have ownership so we can control our narrative. That's what we have to do in a capitalistic society in America. Yeah. Now, you know, of all the factors of economic production, the only thing is not being made new is land. So we have to have
an ideology that actually that's going to help secure that economic foundation, and we can do it. We can do it. I mean, so I think it's not even a can do it. We are doing it in a way. So I think we need to just support each other. But I do think we do need to engage in some, in communist societies, they call it 5-year planning. And I do think we need to do that. We need to come up with a set of benchmarks that are laid out and that are achievable. And I think that it can be done. 1526 is a good marker to actually set up a 5-year plan for how we're going to feed, clothe, shelter each other. That's Dr. Clark asked that fundamental question: how will we keep our people alive on this planet and prosper?
Yeah,
I see that's a question. Can I address that?
Yes, please do. That's why I have it up there.
Okay, Rob. I'm working on it. We have a couple of publishers that we're actually shopping it to, but it could be coming out from University of South Carolina Press or one of the other places. I don't want to really put it out there, and then if it doesn't come from there, but but I'm telling you, we are working on the book. It's an edited text, so we have about 6 or 7 authors who are doing really good research on Gullah literature, on Native American relations with other nations like Haiti. It's an interdisciplinary book. And it's something intended where you could actually use it in a high school or a college context, or you could read it because it's going to be well written as well. So when, that's a good question today. This is 2021. I would say by 2022, 2023, early 2023, it should be out. I know that's a long ways away, but it's coming.
Well, we're gonna bring you back before then because this is an interesting conversation. So Rob, you need to just come back to the show and write notes.
Yeah, I got a question. It might get published before 1526, but I'll keep it posted. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, please make sure it's published before 2026 so we can inform our plans. Y'all, at the bottom, I have been streaming Sam's Twitter. What is it? Twitter? Yeah. Your Twitter address? Yeah. Follow him on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter, and you still keep, get your information on Twitter. Am I following you on Twitter? I will in a few minutes when we get off the show. I'll make sure I am following you on Twitter.
And I would put my website up there, but it needs some help. So I might be turning to you, Marilyn, to get some.
Okay. Well, I'll get you a resource to help out on that. So y'all definitely follow him on Twitter. And I got another question, and I want to answer this one. Can we look into adopting a sister city in Africa from Georgetown once we dig a little more? This is what I want to say is we actually have a sister city in Bermuda. So once again, yes, Africa's important. We could look into that. I think we have about 3 sister cities connected to Georgetown. I know one is in Germany. Definitely one is in Bermuda because of the Joseph Hayne Rainey connection to Bermuda. So we got, we don't have to go as far as Africa to start. I like to put the bricks into the foundation and grow to the bigger vision. And if we need a sister city in Africa, that can happen. But we have a sister city in Bermuda, and we do not cultivate that relationship. And we need to. We need to cultivate that relationship.
Do it. And I think maybe this conversation, the Ball C21 conversations with the folks in Goma and South Africa is going to be helpful as well. I'm definitely going to advocate for, I don't think you can lose with any city, but Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo needs a lot of help. And, we have, basically that's family. The estimates vary, but it could be between 25 to 46% of African people who are brought to the Gullah regions, the Low Country, actually came from Congo or Angola. And people in Congo need a lot of help, but even more important than help, they need solidarity. And that means that when we begin to actually form our policy, that we begin to think about how our policies affect the people in the Congo. Because right now, every single one of us has a piece of the Congo in our phones, and in the form of and those people could be benefiting and thriving from that coltan. So we need to really educate ourselves on that. I would recommend, there's an excellent website for the organization that I work with, called friendsofthecongo.org. Please tune in there, and you can, I mean, there's any number of different ways that you can help. And it's like, believe me, there's room for everybody, for musicians, Rob, for political folks, for economic folks, every single way. So there are several communities, absolutely, friendsofthecongo.org, that really could benefit, because like I'm in touch with some folks in Isangi or Kisangani, and they have like floods that periodically just kind of like wipe out everything. So there's, and I do think we need to begin thinking about encouraging our young people to look at helping to develop Africa as a career opportunity. Everybody else on the planet, the European Union, the United States to a lesser extent, China, absolutely, South Korea, even North Korea. That huge monument in Senegal, y'all see that monument off of the coast of Senegal and Dakar? That's built by North Korea. We need to encourage our young people to look at Africa as a place where you can actually make a living, and not just make a living, but give back to the development of the mother continent, which is going to strengthen all of us. And so I would definitely say, think about a sister city, but also think about encouraging young people to look for a career where they can do something that's going to benefit them and the world.
Sam, I'm definitely with you on that. And I think we need to connect the dots, because it just strengthens all of us when we are working collectively in collaborative work, which also speaks to Africa. So Sister Cities Bermuda, Sister City Africa, I'm definitely on board with that, and making those connections with Africa. So we got to talk about that further, definitely. I'm glad you mentioned those colonizers.
One of the things.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. And I want to make sure, I cannot, a part of our democratic politics and working with the Democratic Party, we got to start chin checking these folks on how they're dealing with Haiti, how they're dealing with Democratic Republic of Congo, how they're dealing with Africa in general. President Obama, I say he wasted some really good opportunities, tried to do some good things, but his policies were basically locked into the same mode of the Democratic policies that Bill Clinton, was pushing. So, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and we can do better than that. We can do better.
His policy was neoliberal policy.
Yes.
So I understand that's a whole nother conversation. We need to bring you back on and have a conversation, but bring some friends too, because we could get into that.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned Haiti, because I'm glad you mentioned the colonizers and the tie to Haiti and Africa, the European colonizers, the Asian colonizers, China. I follow Chinese media, and I actually have received phone calls from Chinese media, because people are going back to Gullah being global, and they are watching. They, to a certain extent, understand the connections. But once again, we have to control that narrative, and I need my community to get more knowledgeable on a global level. We need to study national security. We need to study foreign relations and how all of this impacts the Gullah community, how it impacts Africa. Just this past week, Chinese media posted about Haiti. And it's something that caught my eye, because they shared certain types of pictures that just showed the struggle. And to me, it was propaganda. It was propaganda. So we have to be aware of these things, folks, because ask yourself, those who are watching us now, how many of you really think about China and the context of China and Africa and Haiti and these connections and what's going on? I do not know enough to say what is good or bad, or what's worse or worser or whatever, but I do know we got to pay attention to what's going on and let that inform decisions that we make. And that goes back to what you were saying, the career opportunities in Africa, and to help and for us to work together collaboratively and collectively, because we are family. We are family, if
That's
nothing else. And China is a whole nother conversation too, and its presence in Africa.
But I think there's a point though that you're making that's critical that we need to reemphasize. If you look at what China has done over really since Chairman Mao, they have reshaped their economy, and their whole global plan, their plan for developing their country is based upon the history of what they had before the rise of European colonization. So their Belt and Road Initiative is connecting to Africa, is connecting to Europe, to Central Asia, based upon trade routes based upon their study of their history.
Yeah,
So they get it. They get it.
They get it.
And I mean, and it's like I said, it's not. I'm not saying it's all like good for Africa, but I mean, to me, the lesson is that we need to begin to look at the past. Where do we go wrong? How do we move forward by actually insisting on unity on the African continent, the African Union? That's great. Explore this notion of the sixth region here in the diaspora. And if we have folks who are involved with the African Sixth Region and the African Union, then we need to definitely, the Gullah community needs to be a part of that. Absolutely.
Oh, definitely. And we could go on about that. We have been at this for an hour and 21 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This has been a good conversation. Sam, the invitation is here. I want you to come back. We really have to have these conversations. And I understand in some contexts why we don't, but now we've got to do it now. We've got to have these conversations because we will be left behind. We will continue to be disconnected from things we need to be connected to if we don't get educated and informed about our history and the context of how it impacts now.
Yeah.
And in the global, more importantly, I think, even the global context, what happens in Europe, what happens in China, what happens in Brazil, South America, it's impacting us as indigenous people. The addressing climate change, the environment impacts us. So I don't care about the nationalism in America in the sense of they can live in their alternate reality, but we have to understand why we have to live in the real world.
That's right. Yeah.
And we play a part in it and come from the context of we actually play a part that they cannot disconnect from, because that's part of the reason why we're in the situation we are now with climate change is you've disconnected from your indigenous roots. And we are the indigenous people of this area now. We are the indigenous people. We created a whole culture based on the water and the land. If you're Gullah, you are the indigenous people. So we need to have that awakening to understand our part in what's going on a global scale.
Absolutely. That's the
So any final words, Sam?
Yeah, well, I mean, you said it, but I would just reiterate, just like you said, I think Gullah has a lesson for the rest of the world, and that that message is to reclaim your culture, reclaim your history, and to make connections and try to especially look at what the ways that we were disconnected from Africa, from our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, from Native Americans, as a way to actually positioning ourselves for a global connection. Because I do think that we've already in some ways changed history, but we're going to have to change history again and again and again. And we're not going to be able to do that if we don't study and if we don't show ourselves really ready to show improve and to plan to change this world even further. But we have to explore that Gullah history and can't stop at 1619, go back to 1526. While we're looking at 1526, we connect to Africa, we connect to the Caribbean, we connect to the rest of the world.
Very good. And I think that's the best place to stop today, because y'all, you got your marching orders. You got your homework now from the professor. And we're gonna look for that book, as soon as we can get it. But in the meantime, I put in comments the books that he suggested you read. Follow him on Twitter, and we'll keep in touch. As a matter of fact, Sam, I'm saying, look at your calendar now, and let me know you want to come back on.
Okay,
Let me
absolutely.
know when you want to come back, and I will make it happen because I started the show, so I can do that.
All right. Well,
Hey, I own the show, so I can do that.
okay. Well, I'm gonna tell you now. I'm gonna plant a seed. I'm gonna say the next time, I definitely want us to look at the relationship between Gullah and the history of Pan Africanism, and the way that Marcus Garvey found such a strong seed and base of operation in Charleston and Savannah and in Georgia and South Carolina, as a way of building out, connecting with the rest of the world. But the foundation was here. So there's a lot there. So I do want us to connect with that, and maybe even, bring some other of our folks on who are working with the book, who are contributing to the book as well.
Oh, I would love to do that. I would love to do that. So let's plan on that. Just give me a date. It's every Wednesday and Sunday at 4. Just I got a lot of dates open in April. I'll send you my calendar for March and April, and you just decide when you want to come, and we'll make it happen.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I love it. We'll be talking.
All right. Thank you, sis. Appreciate you now.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Thank you.
All right.
Well, everyone, man, this was interesting conversation today, and I want to thank you on behalf of Sam Livingston, PhD and professor at Morehouse College, for joining us today to talk about the Gullah Geechee origins of African American history. Thank you for your comments. It's been wonderful. And I really want to remind everyone, with the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, we are about educating our folks, not only about the business of doing business, about our culture and our global role that the Gullah Geechee we play. It's a real thing, folks, and you are the leaders in this. Let's be on the forefront. We are the indigenous people that will save all of us. And I want to remind everyone that a gathering place is every Wednesday and Sunday at 4 o'clock. And our next show is the Small Business Administration, because we want to help our local small businesses. So we're going to have Mr. William Furman on from the Small Business Administration, and we're going to talk about those PPP loans. Are they available for minority businesses, and what you need to do to get those PPP loans? All right. So y'all, when we said we got to get ready, the call has been out. Charles Blow put it out. That great migration, reverse migration is happening. Are you ready? Are you ready for the opportunity? So pay attention to what the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce is doing. We're making some moves, and we want our community to make those moves right along with us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Remember, every Wednesday and Sunday at 4 p.m., it's a gathering place, and we're looking forward to having you next time. We'll see you later. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your happy Valentine's Day with your sweetheart or with yourself. All right. Love everyone. We'll see you on Wednesday at 4 o'clock.